So this is Dimitri Gutas' book, Greek Thought, Arabic Culture. Dimitri Gutas, I believe he was born in Cairo. He's Greek. I believe he was born in Cairo, and I believe he was raised in Istanbul, and then moved to Greece, and then moved to the United States. He's part of these older communities of Greek-speaking Greeks who lived in these old Ottoman cities of the early 1900s, Ottoman Istanbul, late 1800s, Ottoman Greece. Greece becomes independent of the Ottoman Empire in the late 1800s, but there were Greek speakers all throughout Greece, Turkey, and Egypt throughout the 1900s, and he's one of them. And he became a professor at Yale, and then I believe he retired. And he has this book about the Greek to Arabic translation movement. The general principles here of this analysis is the idea that the government played a major role in putting money, 1997, putting money into the translation of Greek texts into Arabic, and but also that there was a social support for this. So people were generally interested in Arabic speakers were generally interested in Greek texts. But we also know that way back in the 200s and 300s, in the kingdom of Zenobia, when she was rebelling against the Romans in Palmyra, Eastern Roman Syria, we know that Arabic speakers and Aramaic speakers in Jordan and Syria were already very familiar with Greek texts, and even when they write about Greek texts, in the 200s and 300s, Arabic speakers and Aramaic speakers who study and write about Greek texts way back in the 200s and 300s, they were saying something that Muslims in the 700s and 800s were saying, which is that the ancient Greeks, 200 or 300 years before the time of Jesus, when Aristotle and Plato were writing, that a lot of these ideas come out of ancient Egypt hundreds of years earlier, and then ancient Iraq. Let's take a look at a couple of these sentences here. A century and a half of Greco-Arabic scholarship has amply documented, so meaning history writing today, has documented that about from about the middle of the 700s, 8th century, to the end of the 10th, meaning the 900s, all non-literary and non-historical secular Greek books that were available throughout the Eastern Byzantine Empire and the Near Eastern. So basically, a whole bunch of texts from Greek were translated into Arabic, and this is also this is medical texts, all sorts of texts, religious texts, astrology. Some of these sciences are very modern, like chemistry, but then there were these non-religious sides of chemistry. Sorry, there were these non-modern sides of chemistry, like alchemy. Astronomy is very modern, but then there was a non-modern side of astronomy, which is astrology. And arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, theory of music. This is where some of these texts were considered in the 500s in Eastern Roman Constantinople not very Christian, because they appeared to draw on ancient Greek religion. So like astrology, trying to read the future by understanding the nature and movement of the planets. From a Christian perspective in the 500s, some people thought that this was very kind of anti-Christian. It's associating a lot of power to the planets. And many Muslims at this point were just saying, just translate everything into Arabic and then we'll look at it. So they were not very censorship oriented. When you get to the 1000s, this is where you get Islamic theologians who say, yes, you can measure the impact of the sun on the earth in terms of heat and helping plants grow. But you cannot measure the impact of Mars and Venus in terms of anger and love on the earth. So it might just be make-believe, and there's no such claim you can make about Mars as a kind of anger, having some sort of power of anger, and Venus having some sort of power of love, and having some impact on the earth. Only the sun, you can measure the impact of the sun's heat, but you cannot measure Venus's love or the anger of Mars. So many Islamic theologians began to say it's just not scientific. So we're going to just leave that out. And this is where astrology over time is a way to kind of predict the future based on the nature and movement of the planets. Astrology came to be seen as unscientific in the 1100s in Islamic world sciences, but astronomy was seen as very scientific. So likewise, chemistry was scientific, but alchemy, trying to change one type of chemical into another to create gold and whatnot, that was seen as unscientific. occult sciences. I believe in Arabic that should be al-ulum al-batiniya. I think that might not be the right term, but Galen's, so all these scientific texts connected with surgery and the blood, a lot of this was translated. So a lot of things from 300 years before the time of Jesus, written by Aristotle, and then later commentaries, they were still considered modern, 4, 5, 6, 700, 800 years later, because there was a continuous commentary tradition into the time of Jesus, and then after 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s, 500s. Just like the Arabic writers, Arabic-speaking writers in the 10, 1100s, their texts were being used in Europe all the way into the 16 and 1700s. It says here the translation movement, which began with the accession, so it began with the Abbasid dynasty, took place primarily in Baghdad. It lasted for 2 centuries. And basically you get all these people like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who is a Christian, Arabic-speaking Christian, who many of these people knew Greek, Arabic, and Aramaic, which is Syriac, Suryoyo, or al-Lugha al-Aramiya. They written Aramaic today is called Kuthbonoyo. So all of that was translated into Arabic. Many of the early generation of translators were Christians, but then later ones like Al-Kindi, these were Muslims, but they all spoke Arabic. Many times Christians knew Greek better because they were using Greek for one Christian reason or another. Because also many Christian commentaries were in Greek for like biblical texts. The first claims that the translation movement was the result of scholarly zeal of a few. Anyway, there are debates about, who were the people who originally were pushing for the translation movement besides the rulers, the Khalifa in the 700s. It says here there were some Aramaic or Syriac, Suroyo speaking Christians who were also fluent in Greek and Arabic. They decided to translate some works into Arabic. There's another theory here which says that there were some rulers who were behind this. So there's a big debate about, was it the rulers who originally pushed it, or was it some of these multilingual Christians? But it seems like they were both involved here. And the caliphs here are Al-Mansur, Harun al-Rashid, Al-Ma'mun, and they knew these languages. So very interesting. And it says here that basically hundreds of years of Greek texts, scientific texts, even Greek commentaries on religion, logic, mantiq, this was all translated into Arabic. This was kind of like the science of the time. A lot of it is like, writings on surgery. There were people who were putting money into it besides the Khalifa, patrons, Arabs, non-Arabs, Muslims, Sunni, Shia, a lot of people were putting money into this. Finally, even the concept of ulama, so he talks about how eventually these sheikhs, experts in Quran and Hadith, they also are very much involved in Greek language learning, and this is why a lot of the in the history of commentaries on Aristotle and Plato, you have like people like Al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, and these are people who are qadis in Islamic history, judges, but they also in many cases are doctors, and they're also writing about and critiquing Greek medicine, Greek science. This is where you get Ibn Hazm saying things like there is no connection between love in the human body and emotion and love on the planet Venus. Says you can't connect. He says you can connect the sun, the heat of the sun, with heat in the earth, including people heating up, standing under the sun. But he said you cannot connect Venus with love in humans and Mars with anger in humans, because there's no scientific way to measure this or determine it. So it's just it becomes like silly ideas inherited from the ancient Greeks. And it's the Greco-Arabic translation movement. It's a very complex social phenomena. So this author is very interested in these social dimensions of this translation movement. And so that's the introduction. And basically he just gets now at this point, when you look into the locations and you look into the names, this is where you will see how stories like Justinian in the 500s, a lot of people among the Greek language experts in medicine and science, they were leaving Egypt and Eastern Roman Turkey and Syria, moving over to Sasanian Iraq and Iran. This facilitated the process of the Islamic Empire having a lot of experts already, because they took over Sasanian Iraq and Iran, where there were a lot of these experts living there. And then it just gets into more of these details, how even Chinese people who were living in the Islamic empires were bringing in a lot of Chinese technology, paper, as opposed to writing on like animal skin, writing on paper as a Chinese invention. Later on, you get Chinese gunpowder and Chinese boat technology, rudders to be able to steer a boat. And it gets into how some of these cities, Mosul in Iraq, these are places where you had a lot of these multilingual people who spoke many languages who were able to translate texts from Greek into Arabic, including Hunayn ibn Ishaq, and there were others. You can see here Jacob of Edessa, and these are all places in like Syria and Iraq. The Abbasid revolution, this is where Baghdad attracts a lot of intellectuals and priests from all around the region. And this is where you get Christian clerics, including the Melkites. Melkites refers to the Arabic-speaking Greek Orthodox who were using Greek as a language of religion in Syria and Jordan. And they were in Iraq and Baghdad in the 700s. And they are involved in the administration in the late 600s. It says here, the Umayyads had a Greek language administration, but then there was a reform in the late 600s, moving into the 700s, where the language of administration became Greek. Talks about the Banu Ghassan and the Banu Lakhm again, a lot of these Arabic-speaking Christians. And so Syria, Jordan, Iraq, until today, you have a lot of Arabic-speaking Christians, and they're there in the 500s and 600s, and in Umayyad Damascus in the 600s, and then Abbasid Baghdad in the 700s. They're involved in a lot of these translation activities. So there's Greek going into Arabic, but there's also Syriac or Suryoyo, Al-Lugha al-Aramiya texts going into being translated into Arabic. And so here's more Greek text into Arabic, talks about what's being translated. You also get texts coming out of the Abbasid Afghanistan and Abbasid India, coming out of ancient Indian language. This is where you get, different types of wisdom stories about political administration, some stories about plant medicine, Persian translations, texts about wisdom literature, about ideal varieties of administration, literary texts, and then here it goes into the exact policies under certain caliphs, like the Khalifa al-Mansur in the 750s, the Khalifa al-Mahdi in the 770s, and how they put a lot of money and effort into formalizing this process of translating Greek texts. And they were working in their administrations with Muslims who came from families that were Christian originally. And then here you have this guy Nawbakht, Zoroastrian administrator, who works with the Khalifa, who becomes Muslim. And then you have these old families who are Christian and Zoroastrian origin, whose kids and grandkids remain in the administration, but many of them become Muslim. And this is where you see some continuity between the old Eastern Roman Syria administration and the Sasanian, Iraqi, Iranian administration in the 500s, 600s. It continues in the Islamic world. And you learn about a lot of this from historians at the time. Back then, here you have this guy, it's not Sa'id, it's Sa'id. So Sa'id al-Andalusi in the 1000s, he's collecting a lot of these stories, and he's talking a lot about what the Khalifas were doing in Iraq. Bukhtish, so these names, Bukhtishu, this would be Girgis or Jurgis. These are a lot of these families who were in the administration, who are Muslim, but then from their names and also their stories, that they're coming from Christian and Zoroastrian background. So this is all about the continuity of the old Eastern Roman Syria in the 500s and Sasanian Iran and Iraq. Those administrations are now part of the administration in Baghdad. And so it gets into all the different texts that they are translating, and you can read all about that, Harun al-Rashid. And again, the Muslims were not really interested in censoring any of this stuff. They wanted to see all the Greek and the Persian language and the Sanskrit language texts translated into Arabic in order to kind of evaluate and assess it and learn what they wanted to learn. And this is where you get institutions like the Beit al-Hikmah. People used to think that this was some sort of palace where all these things were happening, but now they think that Beit al-Hikmah may have been just a sort of a series of places where these translations were being done. And the rest of the reading basically just gets into how this continued under different caliphs, including al-Mahdi. Many of the Khalifas were interested in what the Christians had to say about Christianity, of the different versions of Christianity. And so there were a lot of texts that were kind of textual debates between Muslims and Christians. So modern historians today look back at this time and they are often impressed by the open-mindedness of the Muslim ruling circles to have Christians and Zoroastrians at the palace debating Islam, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism and Judaism, and writing about these debates. But this was part of the kind of older administrative style of some of these older empires, where some of the empires and some of the rulers in the ancient times were open to having these kinds of philosophical and religious debates at the palace. It was kind of part of maybe it showed the power of the ruler in ancient times, that they were kind of patrons and governors of these multi-religious empires. Ma'mun, it continues under Ma'mun. So these are a lot of the famous Khalifas under whom a lot of these translations were happening here. And this continues for centuries, and this is a lot of reading, but you can just jump into this and skim through it.